Hello, distinguished friends and colleagues. This is Stuart Hamilton, the Pro-Life Activities Coordinator for the Archdiocese of Louisville, Kentucky, serving under Deacon Stephen Bowling. And this is 5 Minutes for Life, where we take 5 minutes to discuss one ministry, one event, or one topic that affects the pro-life movement here in the Archdiocese of Louisville. Well, it's February, which is Black History Month. That's a secular misnomer. However, it does give us the opportunity to discuss the grave sin against the sanctity of human life, racism. And the way I'd like to do that is by talking a little bit about the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops' latest document on racism in America called Open Wide Our Hearts, the Enduring Call to Love, a pastoral letter against racism. This was put out in 2018 and was greatly shaped by our very own Archbishop Shelton Fobb. So I hope that I do him justice and his thought justice in this video. So what I'm going to do here is break down the document into two foundational principles. We're only going to scrape the surface here of the document, so I'm going to put a link in the description of this video, and I hope that you'll read the document in its entirety. It's a quick read at 30 pages to get more of what I'm talking about. Okay, foundational principle number 1. Race, racism, and the effects of our racist past continue to affect America today. Now, that may be a no-brainer, but unfortunately, the sin of racism, which is a sin against the sanctity of human life, has been greatly politicized. And just like many people on the political left tend to want to stop up their ears when you mention abortion, there are many people who find it politically convenient on the right side of the aisle to turn away when you talk about racism. And we can't do that as Christians. So the document points this out. It says, with the positive changes that arose from the civil rights movement and related civil rights legislation, some may believe that racism is no longer a major affliction of our society, that it is only found in the hearts of individuals who can be dismissed as ignorant or unenlightened. But racism still profoundly affects our culture. People are still being harmed, so action is still needed, unquote. I was having a conversation recently with a politically active person who said the best cure for racism is to stop talking about it. The only reason people are worried about racism is because the media drums up needless conflict and controversy about it. Well, as the document is pointing out, you can't drum up controversy and conflict over something that doesn't exist and no one experiences. But many Americans do experience on a daily basis the continuing effects of racism on our country. I quote again, too many good and faithful Catholics remain unaware of the connection between institutional racism and the continued erosion of the sanctity of human life, unquote. What does that term institutional racism mean and its sister term systemic racism? Both of these are controversial terms that have been kind of co-opted by political groups that are not affiliated with the church. Well, the document spends about half of its length kind of teasing this out. At least in part what it's saying is that the policies of the past have a lingering effect on minority communities here. We see this in what has happened in the devastation of the Native American community. But let's take, for example, the Black community. The Jim Crow laws of the 1950s, the lynching of hundreds of Black Americans through the 1950s and the 1960s, the redlining housing policies that were legal and went all the way up into the early 1990s. These are policies that are within living memory, and they have created large disparities in the Black population when it comes to poverty, criminality, entrance into the criminal justice system, broken homes, disparities on the death row, and disparities in abortion rates. The document points out, for example, that the Black community's been targeted for abortion. That's absolutely true if you look into the statements of Margaret Sanger, the founding of Planned Parenthood, who said that one of her goals was to eradicate Black Americans. And she has achieved a certain amount of that, as there is a startling statistic that Black women are 5 times more likely than any other racial group to not just have one abortion, but multiple abortions. So it's clear from all these disparities that racism is still affecting the black community, but not just the black community. As I mentioned, the Native American community, the Hispanic community, anti-Semitism and violence against Jews is on the rise. All of these things show the first principle, which is that racism is still an issue. And it is not appropriate for a Christian to simply stop up their ears and be dismissive of these claims. For Christians, we must, as the document calls us to, open wide our hearts. And the first bit of practical advice that the document gives us is to hear the stories of people who claim to have experienced racism. Listen to their stories. Take it in, process it, and then ask the very important question: what should I do within the sphere of my influence to begin reversing the effects of racism in my life, in my community? This is a problem that's taken hundreds of years to develop. It's going to take hundreds of years to solve. Well, with God's grace, it'll be quicker than that, but it will take all of us, and all of us being open to it. Now, this brings us to the second foundational principle. The second foundational principle is that any solution of racism has to be rooted in, one, our common origin as being created by God in the image of God, and two, our common destiny in Jesus Christ. Any solution to racism must be rooted in our common origin as being created by God in the image of God, and our common destiny in Jesus Christ. Okay, our common origin, being created by God in the image of God, our common destiny in Jesus Christ, means that racism isn't just an issue for other people. It's not just their issue, it's our issue, because every member of the human family is my brother or sister in Jesus Christ. Okay, our origins as well as our destiny in Jesus transcends normal boundaries and obligations, political boundaries or community boundaries or tribal boundaries. We have an obligation to our brothers and sisters to fix this, but we also have an obligation to fix it in a uniquely Christian way, modeled by our saints who have gone before us. The document lays out lots of practical advices, but they also give us a few people that we can look to for guidance. For example, it talks about the first African American priest, Augustus Tolton, Father Tolton, who went through several instances of egregious racism even within the Catholic Church, and his response is one of charity and love that we can learn from. Or Sister, now Saint Catherine Drexel, or Saint Peter Claver. All of these are examples of people who can model for us a holy way to reverse racism in our communities. And one of the practical pieces of advice is to take these saints' feast days and these holy people and use them as a way to create celebrations within our parish life. They can create parish programming that we can then bring the topic of racism into our communities and finding solutions that make sense within our community boundaries. This can be diverse. It can be any number of things: film viewings or discussion groups or Bible studies, with the specific idea that we are celebrating these holy lives, but we are also trying to model our own efforts. Any effort that would go against our Christian identity to reverse racism would therefore be illicit. For example, violence. The call to violence against police officers in order to deal with racism is specifically mentioned as something that would be inappropriate for Christians and that would be condemned. We must approach this in the way that our saints and our holy sages would. Now, there's lots of practical advice in the second half of this document, but my time is out. So read the document and also go to the USCCB's page on racism. It provides lots of materials. I'll put a link in the description of the video below. If you like what I'm doing here, I ask that you smash that like button, share this video with people you think would like it, and subscribe. And check out one of these other videos that are listed here if you're interested. Remember, every human life is worth fighting for because every human life has dignity in the eyes of God. See you here next time.